Good evening to all of you. Well, it's fantastic to have so many of you online tonight. It is a public holiday in South Africa, and if any of you read my emails, you know that I'm very concerned and getting very annoyed by all these public holidays. But I hope you all voted today. The future of our country lies in it. But without further ado, I wanted to welcome Dolf online. Dolf, it's fantastic to have you all the way from Phoenix.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for having me. I understand you have a lot of public holidays. At first I thought, what's going on? But then I thought, well, maybe it's a public holiday in order of this call. So, but you do have a lot. I'm astounded how few we have here in the States. For instance, at Easter time, everyone celebrated Easter by taking Easter Sunday off. But Friday was a normal work day and Easter Monday was a normal work day. And I know that in Australia and New Zealand and probably South Africa too, it's usually a 4-day weekend. So it's a different world over here.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that, Dolph. I got so frustrated yesterday when one of my team members told me today was a public holiday after all the ones we've just had in April and May. And I actually did some research on it. America has 6 public holidays. On average, the people get about 10 days leave. They create 22.1% of the world's GDP. They have 29.9% of the world's wealth, with only 4.4% of the population, and they are without contest the wealthiest country on the planet. South Africa has 12 public holidays, plus the extra one today because we apparently can't vote and work at the same time. We have 20 days leave. We have 0.57% of the world's GDP, 0.25% of the world's wealth, with 0.07% of the population. And I think, when we wonder why our wealth is losing 29.5% year on year, according to the Global Wealth Index for the last 30 years, I don't think it's that difficult to join the dots, to be honest.
Well, it's not, and I can give you a further example. I was in Greece on, I think it was May the 2nd, 2 years ago when they had an election. And there was tremendous turmoil in the streets because people were complaining that the government was introducing austerity measures. And what they'd done over the decades is they'd progressively lowered the retirement age down and down. And the government said, this is not sustainable. We have to raise it. And everyone protested and said, we won't vote for this. We're not going to allow you to raise it. And the government was trying to raise the retirement age of civil servants from 52 to 54. And they were complaining about it. And that country is essentially bankrupt, or it was on the verge of bankruptcy. I don't know where they stand now. And I think there's obviously a very strong correlation between hard work and smart work and success. And Scott, that not only goes on a national basis, it goes on an individual basis as well, province by province, city by city, cluster of families, clans, if you like, by clan, and individuals. And that's why I'm so excited that we're talking today, because what we're talking about is a new way of working smarter and better and more efficiently. And it's sort of a great segue. And for the record, I don't think either of us planned this.
100%. I mean, to be honest, that was actually very unplanned. I'm probably on my high horse at the moment about all these holidays in South Africa. But I mean, I think just before we get started, and it's fantastic to have so many people online. As I said, it is a holiday. I think most people have recognized it as a day to get stuff done. But where is everyone from? I mean, you guys know how to use the text box now. It's up, and if you haven't used a webinar, it's in the top right corner. You'll see there's a little chat box there where you can raise questions and just give us some indication of where you're from. I want to see who's awake. I can see from the stats here who's concentrating and who's not. And it'll be fantastic just to kind of get an indication of where everyone is from and whereabouts in the beautiful country of South Africa you are, or if you're around the world. We have lots of people that follow us from different parts of the world. So again, apologies while people are coming in for the confusion in terms of the bookings last week. I know that from our side, Dolf and I messed up our communication, and Dolf was actually on an airplane last Wednesday, so there was not much we could do to fix the problem. But while all these are coming in, and thanks very much for everyone. We got people from Zimbabwe, Pretoria, Cape Town, Australia, literally all over the place. So you've got a full pack of people. And we've got a couple from Malaysia, and so we've got people coming in from all over the place, Dolf. But for those who don't know, I mean, I don't think I've got to give a huge amount of an introduction. Dr. Dolf de Roos, I first came across his book, Real Estate Riches, right back in 1999. I was still a university student, and actually before that, it was in 1998, I think it was. I was still a university student. For me, it was one of the most practical books in terms of property. It really was simple. It gave very concise and very logical ways of being able to create wealth through property. I embarked and actually did my very first project at the age of 19. I did my first, my first property transaction when I was 22, and my first property transaction in London when I was 24. And all three of those deals, I used the what I learned from you in this book, Dolf, in terms of real estate riches. The thing that fascinated me though most is the fact that you've been doing international property for probably the longest I've ever seen in terms of people actually talking about it. I know it's pretty common now, but it certainly wasn't a trend 20, 30 years ago. And I know you've advised and worked with the likes of Donald Trump and Tony Robbins and the Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the Rich Dad advisors, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's no need for a massive introduction. I think most people know exactly who you are. And the reason we're all here tonight is to really get into the nuts and bolts. I think it's always fantastic when you read books and you try and understand personalities and you try and understand their success. I know you speak a lot about it in one of your courses, which is called Wealth Magnets. And you say that the thing that frustrates you is that most people just don't have the psychology to create wealth. And I think the purpose of tonight is to really try and get into that psychology, try and understand who is Dolf and why have you been successful and how have you been successful. So, I'm not sure if there's anything I've missed out there, Dolf, but if not, I would actually like to get into some pretty, questions, intriguing questions for me, so we can get some insight into who you are and how you've gained your success over the years.
Well, I mean, thanks, Scott. And that's a broad introduction, though, because there are so many aspects. Sometimes people ask me for the 3 top things they should do. And even in the book that's on the screen now, Real Estate Riches, I remember writing about the 8 golden rules of property. And yet, as you correctly point out, in that course, The Wealth Magnet, I went through this 11-month period of taking a leave of absence from everything I was doing to figure out why it was that even when you give people all the tools they need to become fabulously wealthy, most still don't do it. And proof of this, Scott, is in the horrible statistic of what happens in most of the Western world when people win a state lottery or some kind of lottery. And when I was a kid, I spent a couple of years living on the Gold Coast of Australia back in the days when the entire population of the Gold Coast was only 32,000. That's how old I am, I guess, because now it's about 400,000 and it grows by more than 32,000 a year. But, I remember back to those times when people would win the lottery and tickets would cost 20 cents and you might win $10,000. Well, nowadays, not that many decades later, people are winning tens of millions of dollars. Here in the States, sometimes hundreds of millions. An 18-year-old girl won $98 million not too long ago. 4 people shared in a $600 million jackpot. That's dollars, not rand, by the way. And when you look at the statistics of lottery winners, everyone knows this by now, that within 5 years, about 80% of them are back to where they were before they won. In other words, how can I hope to teach people how to make money if we knew that when you gave people huge amounts of money, enough to retire 3 generations on, that most of them would squander it? And that sort of intrigued me and frustrated me. So I set out on this mission to find out why. It took 11 months, and I believed I kind of cracked it, and I put it in that course, and I share it, and I'm happy to talk about it. So when you say what made the difference, really figuring out the psychology is incredibly important. So maybe I should talk about some of the things about real estate that work really well, and then some of the psychology things. And by the way, you were very kind to say, I've had spectacular successes. And I have. But you can't be in this game this long and not have some spectacular failures as well. And the interesting thing, Scott, it's sort of human nature. I think you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. But anyway, if I were to talk about the things that I think made a real difference in property investing, and I guess, I don't even know, but I guess they're part of these 8 golden rules. But one of the most important things that dawned on me more and more as time went on, that is that people who sell a property, usually to make a quick profit, they bought it for, R500,000 and they can sell it for 800,000 Rand. Oh my gosh, I'm going to make 300,000 Rand profit. I've never made that sort of profit before. I'm going to sell. People who sell tend to regret it because, yes, it went up to 800,000, but you think about it. In most jurisdictions, when you sell for that profit of 300,000, firstly, you've got selling costs, and they vary around the world from 2% of the transaction price to 12.5% some countries. Here in the States, it's typically 6%. So you lose 6%, not of your profit, but of your sale price. So 6% of 800,000 is 48,000, right? If it were 6% in South Africa. So nearly 50,000 of your 300,000, that's 1/6 alone just goes into selling cost. And then you pay tax usually on your profit. If you trade in properties, it's considered part of your business. So the profit gets added to your ordinary income. So you might pay 30, 40, 50%, again, depending on your jurisdiction, tax on that. And by the time you pay, you know, if you've got stamp duty or transaction fees and closing costs and solicitors' fees and all that, by the time all that's paid, you might only realize 180,000 of your 300,000 profit. And Scott, that's not the worst of it. What if 5 years down the track, you see that property being transacted no longer for 800,000, but for 1.1 or for 1.3 million? That means even at 1.1, you could have made another 300,000 Rand tax-free just by holding on to it. And by holding on for that period, you would have had rent coming in and depreciation allowance. So the first point I'd make is that, you know, don't sell. If you can avoid it, never sell. If you bought a lemon, obviously you have to sell. If there's government requisition, sometimes it's called eminent domain, or the government takes over to expand a highway or build something, well, then they have to give you fair market value. Obviously, you have to let it go. You can't hold out under those circumstances. But in
Dolf,
general, people who sell tend to regret it.
sorry, Dolf. Unfortunately, eminent
Sorry?
domain and, you know, they've got to give you fair market value is a given in the first world, but not necessarily in the emerging world. I still own 3 farms in Zimbabwe that, trust me, I didn't get fair value for.
Oh, all right. But even so, if you don't own them anymore or don't effectively have control over them, it wasn't through your choice. It was forced upon you. And, you know, we can't avoid having those things forced upon us. But where you've got a choice, I would say absolutely, if you can hang on to it. People who hang on tend to get really pleased that they did that. So that's one thing. And, you know, there's another thing which is kind of closer to heart here of what we're talking about, and that is that for the first 40 or so years of my life, I thought that I could probably do things best if I did them on my own. I was fast and nimble, and, you know, I always had this theory that if you want to if you want to get somewhere first or do something fast, do it on your own. And I took this to ridiculous extremes, Scott. I could type pretty fast. I learned to touch type on an old Remington mechanical typewriter. This was in the days before electronic keyboards and computers. And the way I did it is I got insulation tape and covered all the keys so that I couldn't see what the letters were. And then I tried to type something. Well, at first, of course, I didn't know where anything was, so I had to hunt and peck until I found the letter T for the word D and then the letter H. But eventually, I learned where the keys were without having to look at the keyboard. And I still think this is probably a great way of learning. So I could touch type with 10 fingers pretty fast. And it worked against me in the end, Scott, because since I thought and knew that I could type faster than most secretaries I ever employed, I decided it would be more efficient if I did most of the typing. Well, that's, of course, ridiculous thinking, and even I can see the folly of this limited thought process now, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but that was the case, and I took this to extremes. I was a one-man operation. I did everything myself. And I was probably more efficient than many, if not most, one-person operations. But here's the real interesting thing, the really interesting thing. I was way less efficient than people who had lesser talents than me in terms of not being able to type as fast and not being able to spell as well and not being able to speak as fluidly. But they had these big teams. And, you know, the massive example of this, of course, is Henry Ford, who once claimed that he could challenge anyone to a knowledge contest and he would have access to more knowledge than anyone else. So they'd send in all these experts on spiders or geography or something, and they'd say, well, what is the capital of Suriname, for instance, in South America? And he'd pick up the phone and start calling one of his geography experts, and they said, what are you doing? We're giving you a quiz. You can't make a phone call. And he said, well, I'm finding out the answer. And, of course, he could get the answer more efficiently and to more questions than any of the experts they happened to brought in. So all this was an eye-opener. So the second thing is work in teams. You know, that's why you've got that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with a team, go with a group. Now, Jim Collins, the ex-CEO of, what was it, Chrysler or something. He wrote a great book, From Good to Great, and he said, you know, you're on a bus with your organization, that's your team. And he said, it's not so much the speed of the bus that counts, or even its direction. It's who have you got on the bus. So he said the first thing you should probably do is bring the bus to a halt, and then, you know, toss a few people off and invite a few others on. Make sure you've got the right team, because with the right team, it doesn't really matter which direction you're going in or which speed you're going at. You'll make something good of it anyway. And I've taken this to heart, and in more recent times, I have totally embraced the idea of teams, and I've done quite well. Now, you have to monitor your teams pretty carefully. I've learned the hard way that if you don't do that, you can get into trouble too. But so there's the thing. The first thing is, if you can, never sell. And the second thing is, where you can, work in teams. And then the third thing, and it's an age-old rule in real estate, but it's still true today as it ever was, and that is, in general, you make your money when you buy. Now, I will add this codicil, or this addendum to it, if you like, and that is that time tends to be extraordinarily forgiving of bad decisions in property. So if you bought a property in the wrong part of the cycle, as long as you're not a trader or a flipper, as long as you're in it for the long haul, time will correct that, and time will correct most things. But if you buy well, then you'll get this initial lift that the person who didn't buy well wouldn't get. So, you know, always be scouring the market, be looking at things, and the internet makes it a lot easier, but it's a double-edged sword, guys, because sure, the internet makes it easier for you to spot a bargain in some remote place that might be too far to you to drive to before morning coffee, but it also makes it easier for everyone else to get to. And a little extrapolation on that, I don't want to go on too many tangents, but a little aside from that is one of the reasons why, in my humble view, it is relatively difficult for the average person to do extraordinarily well on the share market, is that the share market is extraordinarily efficient. And whether you're buying a stock or a share on the London Exchange or the New York Exchange or the Toronto Exchange or the Sydney Exchange, you pay the same price as anyone else from anywhere in the world, because it's all computerized. Whereas real estate isn't all computerized. It's not a requirement that property gets sold through one single central exchange. Some people choose to do for sale by owner, some choose to go through a single agent, some choose to go through a cluster of agents, and some choose to open it up to everyone. In other words, if you're driving home from work and you come across a sign, and the wording will vary around the world, but in this part of the world, it's called for sale by owner. A FSBO, we call it, for sale by owner. It's pretty self-explanatory what that means. It's usually an owner who thinks, why should I pay some young-faced, snooty-nosed real estate agent who thinks he knows everyone, but has only been in the workforce for 3 years? Why should I pay him 3% or 4 or 5% to sell my property when I can probably sell it far better and faster myself? So they don't engage the services of a real estate agent. Nothing right or wrong about that. But what if the homeowner is out of touch with reality? What if he thinks he's doing well to get, you know, $300,000 for it because the one down the road sold for $250,000, so he'll do well. But in actual fact, the true value is $400,000. And because these scenarios exist, then often a for sale by owner will be on the market below its true value. Hey, equally often, just to be fair, it's for sale on the market at more than market value, and you have to be a smart, savvy buyer to avoid buying those lemons or those high-priced properties. But if you know the market well, you can discern these, and you can buy something below value. So I love for sale by owner signs, but even if it's on the market, sometimes agents truly don't know what it's worth, or sometimes they're not aware of a zone change that's coming through, which is going to change it from residential to light commercial, and suddenly that house, which rental value is based solely on being a residence, when it becomes a little dental clinic or a consulting room or an accountant's office or something, the rental might go by 50 or 80 or 100%, and that means the building is worth more. So if they don't know that, you can cash in on that. So anyway, to summarize, Scott, the three sort of main things that I think exist about real estate is, one, that if you don't sell, you'll tend to reap the benefit for a long time. I used to say that the exit strategy was death, but the exit strategy can go beyond death in that you can bequeath the property to whomever or whichever organization you choose. So it's a very long-term plan, so never sell. Number two is work in teams. And number three is you make your money when you buy, or you make a big jump of profit when you buy, if you buy judiciously, which means, of course, you have to understand the market pretty well. Or, reflecting on point number two, there has to be someone on your team who knows the market pretty well.
You know, Dolf,
Anyway, I feel I've rambled on a bit.
no,
But
no.
there are 3 points.
It's so fascinating, and I think it's so critical for people. And you know, the one that comes to mind for me is well, two of them that you said is firstly working in teams. I mean, you talk about that whole problem with people and having the right mindset and wealth and all that, and you know, exactly that. People try and work in isolation, and you know, I always ask people when the game walk across the savannah and or the birds all fly from north to south, you know, do they try and fly on their own? They don't. It's actually going against nature's laws. And the second thing for me that, you know, as I said to you, I read your book when I was 19. I've used it multiple times. I mean, that first house I bought when I was 22, you know, it was a big old 5-bedroom house in Rondebosch, but it had R4 zoning. And just by doing that, we created over 2 million rands worth of value, knocked it down, built 6 townhouses. I mean, just to add up exactly what you're saying. I mean, in London, our first one, 3-bedroom house, it was a 3-bedroom house to everyone else. But by putting a conservatory on, we managed to turn that into a 5-bedroom house, and it's been positive cash flow income by over £1,000 every single day since we've owned it in 2002. You know, and Teeson Island, we bought our family home here. The agent told us a price. I said, "Where did that number come from?" And she said, "No, she's based it on replacement cost based on what it was built for 12 years ago and extrapolated it. You know, I mean, the most ridiculous calculation I've ever heard of, and managed to get the property for over 2 million less than originally what they were asking for." And lastly, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later if people hang online, but I mean, Dolf and myself and Henny have been, you know, looking at an opportunity in Atlanta at the moment, a medical portfolio. And there again, a bunch of unsophisticated 8 doctors are selling a whole portfolio, and we're managing to pick it up even in today's terms at just roughly on or around below 8% below market value today. And again, you're dealing with sellers that don't really know what's going on. They don't know how to market. As Dolf said when we were there, he goes, "You can't understand it. They don't even necessarily, don't even have boards outside, etc., etc." So, you know, just reiterating what you're saying, Dolf, and really just putting it. And I know you've got hundreds of examples in terms of what you've done and in your book and everything else. And I think it is so critical in terms of the opportunities. The second thing that absolutely always fascinated me about you was that, you know, you were born in New Zealand. You speak 6 languages, but for me, the thing that fascinated me right back, you know, I've always believed in international and globalization and what's happening and the fact that the globe's becoming a little village. But you were doing it literally 30 years ago. And why was it so obvious to you then? It amazes me that it's not obvious to everyone now, but ironically, particularly in South Africa, most people have the fair van jou goed na in jou skade, which means I want to be poor for the rest of my life because I'm going to invest right next to my home. But I mean, why is it, and how did you see it so long ago that people should have diversification and can take advantage of different markets around the world?
Well, that question is very kind of you to ask, and I wish I could say, yes, I had great insight when I was young, and I knew this was the trend. But the truth is, Scott, I don't believe I had that insight. I was just a product of circumstance. And I think it's fair to say that most kids, when they grow up, whether they grow up in a very modest shack or in this big mansion, they think that's normal. They don't think about it too much, and that's just the way the world is. And it's only when you grow up that you realize, hey, other people are living in much bigger houses than I grew up in, or other people live in much smaller shacks than I grew up in. I mean, it varies. So I happen to come from a family that was on the move. I was born in New Zealand, but I started kindergarten in Amsterdam. And I ended up going to school in 6 countries. I mentioned I had 2 years of schooling, my grade 3 and 4 in Australia. And then I've lived in another 7 countries, and we traveled so much so that, you know, people often ask me, were your parents in the military? And I say, no, not at all. Or, well, you know, were they in the diplomatic service? And I say, no, not that either. And they say, well, what were they? And as a joke, I said, I don't know, I guess they must have been on the run. And that's not the truth either. You know, like many people from Holland originally, they went to Indonesia after the war and had a good time there, but things got pretty rough, you know, post-war independence movement, totally understandable. And they had a choice of going back to Holland or trying something else. And They decided to try something else, and we sort of moved around a lot. And I just grew up that way. I grew up understanding that there were multiple languages and cultures and currencies, and it was even more global, and the sense of this global interconnectedness of the world was greater then, because in Europe, for instance, you'd have German marks and Dutch guilders and Swiss francs and Italian lira, and it went on and on. It was kind of interesting. And I know the world is better off for having the euro in many ways, but the world has also lost a bit of its charm in that sense. And so I sort of fell into it. But because I fell into it, I thought nothing of it. Even back then, I would hop on a plane the way most people would get in a taxi and think nothing of it. And I'm astounded, Scott, even today, like, I've just had 4 long-haul flights across the Pacific in the last month, and people constantly and almost without exception would say things like, oh, aren't those terrible long-haul flights, aren't they just killers? And I say to them, why are they killers? Have they killed you? I said, firstly, no. If I'm hungry, they give me something to eat. If I'm thirsty, they give me something to drink. I can watch movies, read books, talk with people, sleep. No one says, why are you sleeping at 11 a.m.? I mean, it's just all sit and go. And you cannot, and therefore don't have to respond to emails and texts and all that, because we're not yet interconnected, which relates to why I couldn't get on that call last week. Of course, now they're starting to introduce internet services on flights, and at some stage in the future, you might say, Dolf, can you do a webinar? And I say, well, I'm in the air, and you'll say, so can you do a webinar? Because we will be connected. So I just grew up in that world, Scott, and it's only now with the benefit of hindsight that I realize that most people aren't that way. And if, the bulk of our listeners are in South Africa, they might be able to relate to this, because I obviously love it here in America. I'm here by choice, and I have the option to live in many places. But one thing that continually astounds me is the low propensity to international travel. They estimate that something like only 17% of Americans have a passport, and only 5% travel in any given year. And I know that the stats in Europe are almost at 100%. And in Australia and New Zealand, for instance, most people do what we affectionately call the big OE, and it stands for overseas experience. You basically get kicked out of the country, you bartend in London for a while, you backpack throughout Europe, and you come back 2 years later, probably poverty-stricken, but worldly-wise, you understand a bit about the world. And that doesn't go on here. And that's why those stats you quoted before, Scott, are so interesting, where, something like with 4% of the population, 21% of the GDP, and whatever those numbers were, it is out of proportion to the population. But those stats are diminishing rapidly. Last year, for instance, China surpassed Japan as the world's second biggest economy. And you might say, well, so they ought to have. They've got a population estimated at around 1.3 billion, and Japan only has 125 million, and the population in Japan is declining, and in China it's growing or stable. So of course you shouldn't surpass it. But on that basis, China will surpass the United States within the foreseeable future, and India will probably surpass China at some stage. So things are in a total and constant state of flux. And the takeaway from all of this is we are in an increasingly interconnected world. It used to be that economies ran autonomously. What happened in one country didn't really affect another country. And the first time this changed was about the time you were finishing school or university, Scott. It was 1998 when the Thai baht had that big hiccup. Many listeners will remember this. And within a month, that echoed through to Argentina. And it took several more months for it to echo around the world, but the effects were felt internationally. Now that was, 15, 16, 17 years ago now. But the big GFC that we're all talking about now, that's more recently on our minds, that started arguably 2006, 2007, 2008, the consequences of that rippled around the world much more quickly. And my contention is that the world is increasingly more interconnected. We are more interdependent on each other. And that does a number of things, of course. It gives the relative advantage I had as being global and being able to freely roam around the world, and whether I'm driving on the left-hand side of the road or the right-hand side of the road, and whether I'm using yen or pesetas or euros or dollars or rand, it doesn't really matter. It was just the different words you use. Here in America, when we walk beside the road, we walk on what's called the sidewalk, whereas down under, we walk on the footpath. And I understand in South Africa, you walk on the pavement. And it doesn't matter what you call it. It's the same thing you're walking on. In some parts of the world, you get your valuation done by a valuer, and in other parts of the world, you get your appraisal done by an appraiser. And when you use the word valuer here in America or appraiser down under, people look at you as if you're from another planet. And of course you're not, Scott. You've just picked up some lingo from another country. And even the languaging we're using is becoming more global as TV programs proliferate.
Well, I mean, I
To a
think
large part.
I think to back you up
Yeah.
there, it's not even. I mean, it's one of those things, and that's one of the reasons partnership's so important. Is because if you take America, I mean, we were trying to close that commercial deal literally 3 weeks ago, and the way that it's done in South Africa and the way that it's done in America is completely opposite. And I don't have the time to go into the details tonight, but if you try to do it the South African way in America, it doesn't work, and vice versa. But equally so, if you had all your money invested in American property in 2007, you'd be feeling like a bit of a class clown. And that's the balance between taking advantage of different markets, and obviously timing and fundamentals and the things that are important.
You're exactly right. And in the last few days of my being independent and doing everything myself, I had to learn that, I was used to conveyancing solicitors, and they would convey the property from the seller to the buyer. And here we use escrow companies, and you have to learn about title insurance. And it was all strange. But the smartest thing to do is to team up with people who deal with that all the time. And, you can't reach the level I've reached without getting a lot of critics around. And some people would say, listen, how can Dolf possibly be conversant with real estate around the world? Because we're finding it pretty tough to be knowledgeable just in our own backyard. There are so many rules and regulations. It's impossible to keep up with them. So how can this hot-headed blah, blah, blah think that he can do it all over? Well, it's quite easy. I don't do my own conveyancing in other parts of the world. I don't do my own appraising or home inspections or loan applications. You have team members to do that. It's not the best use of your time. The best use of my time, I find, is looking for deals with a twist, because I always seem to ferret out deals that other people haven't found. And I don't know if the valuers or appraisers can't find them because they're too busy valuing, and the loan managers can't find them because they're too busy writing loans. The reason doesn't even matter. The fact remains that I'm good at finding deals, or if you give me any deal, I'm good at finding out what we can do to that deal to enhance its value even more. Ridiculous things, Scott. We put a helipad on the roof. It costs $20 of paint and Civil Aviation Authority approval, of course, and the building can go up in value by $2 million. I mean, we've done this. This is the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things you can do to properties that one of the books I wrote is even called, and it's not a plug for it, I don't have it available to anyone, 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. So I live and eat and sleep and breathe by these notions.
Well,
and you're right, that's why team is so important.
It brings me so well on to the third question, which, you've written all these books, you've worked with all these people that people understand, and, be it Robert Kiyosaki or Tony Robbins or Donald Trump. But, what I found amazing is you travel the world and you share your knowledge and you share the stories of the helipad and the, what do you call it, when people die, the mortuary and all that type of stuff. But what I've understood from getting to know you a lot better is that you get the most joy out of doing deals, as you said, and really adding value, or in the commercial world, finding ways to lease buildings that no one else has been able to do, et cetera, et cetera. How do you balance the two? I mean, a lot in most cases, most people are just educators and they kind of make money by selling their time on stage or selling books. But you enjoy getting involved and doing the deals. How do you see that? What's that balance between the two?
Well, I love doing the deals, but I love sharing how you do it if people don't understand it. And you've reminded me of something, Scott, that I haven't talked about in ages, if ever, and that is when I was in my first year at university, I used to do some remedial teaching. I used to help people with math, and I started with students who were a bit slow, so we'd go over what whole numbers were, or just integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'd introduce the concept of zero, because for some kids they can't understand nothing, and then we'd try and introduce the concept of negative numbers. If you have 2 apples and you take away 3, you get -1. Well, that's mathematically correct, but how do you represent that in your mind or on a kitchen table? And I found it really frustrating because we'd get them to understand it, and then by the next week, they would have forgotten and would have to start all over again. And I got really frustrated, and I went to this institution I was doing this for, and I said, I'm just not enjoying it. It's frustrating. And they gave me a bunch of gifted students as an alternative to try. And these were at the other end of the spectrum, and they learned really quickly. And I had the most tremendous fun with them because they were fast to learn and we could get concepts. And I realized that I really enjoyed sharing knowledge and opening their eyes to a world that they didn't know existed. And I get the same buzz out of teaching real estate. I wouldn't want to teach remedial real estate students who didn't want to do it, and the only reason they were there is because their parents forced them to sit in my class. I mean, that would be terrible. But I find that when I put on an event or I go somewhere and teach, usually the people are there voluntarily, and they want to learn. And that's kind of fun, where you can share something as simple as how you can turn $20 of paint by painting a circle and putting the letter H in it into tremendous value in a building. And they get that. I mean, everyone is on a high. And, you know, true virtue is to do without witness what you do in front of thousands. And, you know, I'm happy to do this teaching, and the feedback we get from books. Scott, this is the first time I've heard of specific deals that you did, which you very graciously largely attributed to having read these books. And I can't deny that as you were going through that, I got a bit of a kick out of thinking, wow, so in some strange way, shape, or form, and no matter how minor it was, I influenced your ability to make money. I could have joked and said, you made how much? Now, what was my commission on that? But, you know, I don't write the books for that. It just gives me a great thrill. So there's nothing like sharing. You can't describe what it feels like when someone says, you know what, you made a difference.
I think also, I mean, there is that component that most people don't understand, and you know, when you hang around sophisticated, high net worth people that play this game at another level, there's an inner circle, and certain people get invited into deals and certain don't, and you know, I'm sure that component is very valuable for you because you get invited around the world to look at certain opportunities, and it's one of the reasons why partnership is such a valuable instrument, because you know you certainly don't have access to everything and everyone, but if you're getting access to the right type of people, then it's going to certainly give access to the right type of deals. And I think people really battle to understand how valuable that inner circle is. I mean, you were just mentioning yesterday that you had lunch, or you went to an event with a friend of yours that you know is one of the authors for the Dummies series, just as an example. You know, very few people tend to do that on a regular basis, you know.
Right. No, I can't deny that's a real thrill. And that's why I really want to add to what I said before about the advantage of a team is that you get to hang with people who are smarter than you. That is very true. I stand by that. But it also helps if you want to be invited onto teams, if you can do something better than anyone else. And I don't think that should be an onerous directive on me. I want everyone listening in to know that every single person on this planet can do something better than you can. You know, that's kind of quite humbling. But the flip side of that is that you can do something better than everyone else on this planet. And sometimes you just have to figure out what it is. You know, I'm pretty good at real estate in general, but I'm not brilliant at it. I'm good at a few things. And when I team up with people who are better appraisers than I am, and people who are better mortgage funding application filler-outers than I am, and all that sort of thing, and if I can contribute something that I can do better than they can, then we've got the makings of an awesome A-team.
Tell me, Dolf, the age-old debate. It's probably been debated, you know, as much in real estate or property as anything else. And I know that you've got a huge amount of experience in both. I know you've written books in both, and I know you've done a lot of deals and investments in both. My question a lot of people ask, you speak a lot about residential and commercial. Which one do you prefer, and why? What are the reasons for it, and what do people need to understand? What's the difference between the two, and why do you prefer one over the other?
Wow, that's a good question to ask. I'm seldom asked quite that up front. Here's the thing. I've written 15, 16 books now on real estate. All but one have been on residential. And only one book, it's also my largest format book, it's got photos in it as well, but only one is on commercial. And many come to the conclusion that I pandered to the need to talk about commercial by agreeing reluctantly to write one book, whereas the thrust of my writing has been on residential. And that's not the truthful answer at all. I started writing on residential because, to be honest, that's what I started with, and I understand you did too, Scott. You bought a property that was residential, not commercial. But as time went on, I realized the relative advantages of commercial over residential. such that I even write in my book on commercial, I said, once you understand how and why commercial real estate works, you will never even want to look at another residential property. Now, anyone listening, if you've already got 1 or 5 or 20 residential properties, don't beat yourself up about it. I'm not saying sell them. They're still better investments than probably just about anything else you could do. On average, there'll always be landslides and earthquakes and tornadoes that will ruin what I'm saying for particular instances. But in general, it will still be a great investment. But I far prefer commercial. And Scott, I just ran a 2-day event in Australia on the merits of investing in commercial. So, I know we don't have time, but I can talk about it for 2 days, but very briefly. Firstly, you're dealing with contracts instead of people, and contracts are generally in black and white, and everyone understands them. Whereas when you deal with people, it gets a lot more wishy-washy. Now, I know that residential properties have tenancy agreements or whatever they're called, which is a contract, and commercial property deals with people, the tenants, and I know, but in general, it's far more contractual than residential. And secondly, you get long-term leases on commercial. You don't on residential. The tenants earn their income in a commercial property, so they've got a vested interest, at worst, of keeping it looking good. They don't with residential. And there are so many advantages. The most frequent call we get from our commercial tenants is, can we please get an extension on the lease? And we'll look it up and say, but sir or madam, you've still got 3 years to run, or you've still got 5 years to run. And they'll say, so can we please get an extension on the lease? They want longer leases, not just if they want to be there for a long time, but in case they want to sell the business. Their business is worth more to a buyer if it's got a long lease than if it's got a short lease. The advantages so outweigh the disadvantages that I focus almost exclusively on commercial properties.
So, I mean, from your perspective, Dolf, and I'm actually asking people on the call, I mean, I think most people go through, in fact, I've only ever in my life met one person that their very first deal was commercial, and that's the only thing they've ever done. They've never done residential in their lives. There's only one person, funny enough, an American based out of San Diego. But, most people go through that transition, and I think it's really, really important. And I'm actually asking people at the moment which one they would like to focus on, which one they would prefer, the difference between residential, commercial. We've got obviously property funds or REITs, we've got syndication, and then we've got something that's pretty new and pretty exciting that's going to change the world, but in terms of the whole crowdfunding thing. But it's just interesting seeing what different people are. I mean, what I wanted to mention is, I mean, you've already shared so many insights in terms of what is actually happening, what you're doing, the difference between residential and commercial. And I just wanted to mention for those people that have been online for a little while, in terms of the Global Property Summit, we've actually got on the 13th of May in Durban, the 15th of May in Cape Town, the 20th of May in Midrand, and the 22nd of May in Bloemfontein. And on the 23rd to the 25th of May, we've actually got the Billionaire Breakaway. Now, this is an opportunity this is not a sell-a-thon. It's not where people are going to come along and try and sell you products or coaching. I know South Africa's had a scourge of them in the last year and a half. There won't be products. There won't be coaching. All that we're looking at is the opportunity to do deals together. So it's to take the knowledge from people that really understand what they're doing, to understand and to build teams. Everything that Dolf has been talking about, and whether it's residential or commercial, doesn't actually matter. I've spent a lot of time, and you can see now. I'll put that slide up there. And different people have different objectives, and different people have different things that they want to focus on. But the beauty is that we're getting the best people globally to be able to come to South Africa and to give people opportunities. And we've got a really, really exciting launch that we're going to be launching over this time. And to be fair, it's going to be the first time worldwide. The only reason we're doing it is that we've a couple of us that are some of the founders actually have South African accents. But I mean, it's irrelevant. It's a global company, and it just gives South Africans an opportunity to really get a look in. And as I said, there's a huge amount of events out there. Imitation is a serious form of flattery. For me, the 20th century was all about selling things. It was standing on stage and teaching people, and then getting them to run to the back and try and buy a course or coaching. Whereas 21st century is all about partnerships. And really, for us, what we're going to do and what this event is all about is both local and international property experience. And I think the most important thing is it all comes back to track record. You can look at people, they can talk a good game. I know there's an organization that, I don't know, Dolf, if you even know this, that is selling in South Africa now. and you can pay 1,400 Rand a month to be coached by them. And I nearly fell off my chair when I asked the guy how many property deals he personally had done in his life, and he had done 3, and he was the founder of the company. You know, when I compare them to sort of your track record and mine and some of our other partners, it really is, it's really a little bit interesting. You know, and our asset managers talk about what they learned in the UK and what works and what doesn't. And I think the most important thing that I've learned in life is that, you know, if you want to get something done, deal with the best. Go straight to the top, partner with the best. You know, don't deal with the best in Cape Town or the best in South Africa. Deal with the best globally. It's the only way to do it. And when you look at it, and I'll go through this in a little bit more detail towards the end, and some of the opportunities. And if you do stay at the end, I will show you how you can actually come along to this event with a 50% discount. But I mean, our combined experience, just out of the 4 top executives in our team, is 128 years. You know, you've got Dolf, who's online, and I've already explained. You've got Henny. A lot of you have heard and spoken to Henny. He's listed 2 companies, one in South Africa, one in Australia, and has been investing internationally for over 15 years. You've got Ian Scott, who's the senior managing partner of Grant Thornton, one of the biggest accounting firms in South Africa and internationally, and the company that audits 80% of all South African property funds. Myself, a lot of people know who I am, and for those of you who don't, we've got the book. And if you are interested, just type in there property going global or PGP, and we'll actually send you a copy of our book. It's fantastic that so many people are online. And then we've got a really sophisticated team of people that have been around a long time and been involved in property. So, you know, for those of you who are interested, everything that Dolf is sharing tonight, you know, is just a preamble at the end of the day. We're trying to share as much as possible, but at the end of the day, you know, 95, 96, something like 97% of people take the information, they get the theory, and they never actually take action. And, you know, Dolf, it brings me perfectly on to the very next question. You know, what are people supposed to do if they're at the different level? I mean, what do you do if I'm trying to start out? What do you do if I've got great experience in South Africa? Or what do you do if I've got great experience internationally? You know, because action is what it's all about. And, you know, most successful people know that they've got to have a good team and partner. But what would you suggest people do that at different levels, you know?
Well, I'm not sure how you mean. If we're teaching them individually, then obviously the information we share with them has to be tailored for them. If they don't have a passport and they don't understand other currencies, then, you know, maybe the best thing is to show them how they can buy another residential property locally. But you're right with what you said before, that in the past there has been the scramble for everyone to learn how they can do it all themselves. And it doesn't always work that way. I mean, think of these 8 doctors trying to sell these medical buildings. I don't excoriate them for selling and saying, you silly fools, if only you understood real estate better, you know, you'd hang on to them. Because what they're really good at and what they've spent years, you know, decades of time training for is how to be good surgeons and medical practitioners. And Maxwell Gladwell talks about you know, the 10,000 hours you have to put into a field to really become an expert in it. It's not even whether you're accredited by society as being an expert. But once you put 10,000 hours of effort into a specific field, then you sort of have all the knowledge you need to do really well. So these 8 medical practitioners in the United States, they're probably really good at what they do. And I think from their perspective, it's smart not to be bothered with the real estate and learn all the ins and outs about it and read your book, Scott, and read some of my stuff and read other people's stuff and figure out what to do with their property portfolio that's not performing so well for them. I think they're better off just sticking to the knitting, as it's called, and doing their medical practices and selling the portfolio and letting people who are specialists in that, you know, really work that well. Not to their disadvantage. I don't think we should double the rent on them. The market wouldn't sustain it. But I think we can relatively easily find tenants for the vacant space, as you already alluded to. They didn't even have for lease signs on the building. So the 40 or 50,000 cars going by there every day, none of the occupants realized that there was space available for lease. It's sort of a bizarre situation. But it's like someone hobbling around in agony because I, as a real estate investor, don't realize he broke his leg. In fact, you might think that's ridiculous. I did break my leg. I thought it was pretty sore, but I hobbled around and I had friends there. I was at a big get-together of about 60 people, and there were some EMT specialists, and they sort of punched me on the shoulder and said, "Don't be such a wimp, Dolf. You probably just sprained it." So I hobbled around for a day until I eventually drove myself, can you believe this, with my left foot on the accelerator to a hospital and got an x-rayed, and they said, "Oh my God, you broke a bone." So, you know, I'm just not an expert at that, and I don't claim to be, and I don't suggest anyone gets advice from me on how to heal an orthopedic situation, a broken bone or something.
Yeah. Yes,
So, you know, what advice do we give them? It has to be tailored to the level they're at. But the big trend is away from learning how to do it all yourself and partnering with people who know best how to do it and who have the time and to dedicate and to devote to the task at hand, and let you do what you do best, which might be generating the capital to invest.
I agree with that. And I mean, I have put up a poll for people, for those of you aren't concentrating. You know, I'm just interested in terms of your different levels, because what we can do then is also, you know, give you some advice and point you in the right directions. Because the last thing you want to be doing is running over to Atlanta and trying to buy a commercial portfolio for 15 or $16 million if it's your first property investment ever. There's a pretty much a guaranteed chance of failure. But equally so, if you own, you know, 100 properties all in Johannesburg, you might want to be looking for alternative options, you know.
Right, and something outside of Johannesburg, and probably if it is 100, outside of the country. Not to be seditious to any one country. Listen, folks, if you think that I'm being seditious to any one country by saying going global is the only way to go, and we're at the cutting edge now. I mean, I led it, I guess, in a sense. I was doing it decades ago. But more and more people are joining this bandwagon. And I think in one generation time, not 3 generations, in 25, 30 years' time, I think it will be the norm. In fact, there are great books out there, and if you read them, you'll come to believe that maybe the whole concept of nations with strict borders is going to fall by the wayside. And even that is not a seditious thought, because if you think of the EU as it's known now, it used to be the EEC and only involved 6 countries. It's now expanded to 27, and they're gobbling up another few to be 31 before long. They've gotten rid of most of their local currencies. It's one currency. They've gotten rid of borders between these countries. Just going from Belgium to France, you used to pass the douane, or what's it called, the customs post on the Belgian side, and then on the German side, and they'd check for passports and registration papers and insurance on cars. Now that's all gone by the wayside. And I think as time goes on, more and more countries are forming global pacts, and NAFTA, which stands for the North American Free Trade Association, and CER, Closer Economic Relations, and all these things, free trade agreements. It's happening. And the world is getting more and more global. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the foreseeable future we get a global currency. Bitcoin seems to have a lot of proponents and a lot of detractors, and they had a hiccup on their Tokyo exchange with some scoundrel taking off with money. But there is clearly a need and a desire for a global currency that's going to change the rules. It's going to change the way transactions are. And right now, it's all the big banks who benefit from the trillions of dollars transacted every week because they get commissions. And I think it's fair to say that Bitcoin or some facsimile of it is going to get rid of that. And the whole world is changing. And you can either be an observer or you can be a participant. I always like to say, Scott, there are 3 kinds of people: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened. And you've got to decide in which category do you want to be. And
Well, I mean,
most people are happy to watch things happen.
I think we're very much in that phase of watch things happen, and I truly believe that what we're doing, and the trend or the wave or the momentum or whatever you want to call it, is going to revolutionize banking, insurance, medical aids, and every other organization where people put money collectively together. They're dissatisfied. There's huge fees involved. There's lack of transparency and trust. And I personally think, along with property or real estate, the whole thing is going to be completely revolutionized. Dolf, a quick question. You've traveled all over the world. You're from New Zealand. You speak 6 languages. Why do you live in America?
Wow. Well, I'm not saying this is necessarily the end station for me, but I can't deny I love it here. Firstly, it's not just that I live in America. I live in Phoenix, and Phoenix has, something like 330 or 340 blue skies, sunny days a year. And I think there's a strong correlation between the weather and people's disposition, their mood, whether they're essentially happy or not. And I love Europe. I love the history and the food and the architecture. And I spend a lot of time there. But I think that for long stretches during the winter, when the skies are gray and it's a bit smoggy and all that, people kind of get a bit depressed from it. Whereas here, it's always sunny. This is probably the only city in the world where hardly anyone wears a suit and tie. It's just too warm. So we're always casually dressed. Everyone tends to be in a good mood. I love that aspect. And secondly, Phoenix has a dubious distinction, depending, of course, on which stats you look at. But many, many statistics bear out the reality that, on average, Phoenix has grown at above the national average for decades, something like 50 years. It started as a puny little out west town, and it's just grown and grown. Few people realize that it's now the 5th largest city in the United States. The airport is the 5th busiest. Something like 1,200 aircraft movements a day, over 100,000 passengers a day. That's nearly 1 million a week. It's massive, and it's growing. And because it's growing so fast, there's the seemingly unending need for new housing stock and more banks and more podiatrists and dentists and you name it. So the growth is phenomenal. There are some of the reasons why I like it. I like the geographic positioning of it. It's sort of relatively easy to get to the West Coast, LA, San Francisco, San Diego. It's not too far from the East Coast. America, it's still, for all its faults, and everyone around the world seems to delight in pointing out the faults of America. And, there are some challenges faced here, but for all those faults, there is still a net influx of people. I mean, people still risk their lives to come and live here. And that is because whichever way you cut, slice, or dice it, there are freedoms here, despite, you could argue the other way around, that we're the most observed nation on this planet, and everything's monitored and all that sort of thing. But it also has tremendous freedoms. The ease of setting up a business here is very good. I lived in Belgium for many years, and oh my gosh, just to set up a company there, and the fees you have to pay, and the registration fees, and the onerous GST requirements and all that, it was massive, and sort of a disincentive to work there. In fact, when I talked about buying and selling costs of a home, and I mentioned 12.5%, I was referring to Belgium. And there are stamp duties there and commissions and whatnot, such that if you buy a property in Belgium, I don't know if it's still this way, but when I lived there, it certainly was. If you bought a property, say for $100,000, and you decided that night you didn't like it, and you wanted to sell it and just get your money back, you'd have to sell it for $123,000 just to break even. I mean, that is ridiculous. And what it does, of course, is it stymies the real estate market and all these other markets. And, that sort of goes a long way to explaining why I like it here. It's pretty easy here. And, they have rules, but in general, they're pretty clear. I do like that.
It's interesting. And we're going to be sharing at the Global Property Summit this new venture that we're going into that is literally going to revolutionize property forever. And provide opportunities for everyone, whether it's at residential, commercial, or international level. And we've actually put the head office and the holding company, if you want to call it that, at the same jurisdiction as Google, Amazon, SAP, Coca-Cola, just to name a few. So it is interesting, and these are the type of secrets that we're going to actually share. Dolf, something that always amazed me with, again, coming back to the question, you've chosen to live in America. A huge amount of South Africans out there spend a huge amount of money investing in interesting countries like Cyprus or Portugal or Spain, Malta, Mauritius, and numerous other countries, and even in America on the EP5 program, in an attempt to try and get a passport. It was interesting 2 years ago, everyone was telling me that they should invest in Cyprus, and I went and looked at the research, and sales were down 91%. The market was in free fall, and guys were like, yeah, but I get a passport. I was like, dude, it's like buying a boat. You might be getting a passport, but you're not getting a good investment, But you did it differently. I mean, you didn't get an EB5. So, there's a lot of gray areas, and again, it's about knowing, who to know. But I mean, you moved to America by doing traditional business and buying good investments. And I know we don't have a huge amount of time tonight. I'm conscious of the time, but it is something for people to understand, because I'm sick and tired of watching South Africans make bad investments in bad countries with bad assets trying to buy a passport when they can actually make good investments in good assets and get a passport?
Well, that's true. I mean, we'd have to look at each individual's motivation, because for some people, getting the passport is secondary. They just want to get their capital out. For instance, there's one country that we're dealing with at the moment. It's in Asia, and they are so petrified of what their government might do in terms of clamping down on export of foreign reserves and all that sort of thing, that they are wanting to get some of their money out. And one way of getting their money out is applying for a passport. And so that's sometimes the motivation. Other people are so keen to get a passport because they want to emigrate from their country. They think there's imminent doom where they are. And so, getting a passport in Cyprus for some of these people might be better than not having a passport at all. And for them, the investment might be secondary. So it depends on what your motivation is. There are many countries that offer an investment path to a passport. There are some Caribbean nations that for a relatively modest sum, you just park the money there and you get a passport. How useful those passports are, I don't know. They're probably not very useful compared to a Western European one, but they might be better than from the country where they're coming from. I'm sure there are many refugees from, the countries in Northern Africa who would covet a passport from some minor Caribbean island, even if you do need a visa to travel to any other country with that passport. So I think we should separate them a bit. But you're absolutely right. There are, you should not be seduced to making an investment just because of this passport opportunity, and it turns out to be a bad investment. I see a lot of that happening. And the procurers of these passports don't even mind that they lost their $500,000 in this investment because they got a passport. There are legitimate ways of applying for a passport through an investment program where the investment can be very good. And it's like anything. You've got to go in with your eyes and ears wide open and do your research and do your comparative analysis, and don't believe everything you hear.
Yeah, I think.
If I reflect on the time.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to add, if I reflect on the times when I've been caught out by bad decisions, it's because I didn't fully investigate the consequences of dealing with this group or this person or this project. It just sounded good, and so you tended to say, okay, well, let's do it. So you have to do your due diligence always, whether it's buying a property or embarking on a passport program. But you're right, there are great investments, and to separate the two, just buy your power, invest a lump of cash in some countries to get your passport, and then make good, judicious investment decisions. Or if you can combine them, that's all right too. But don't be swayed into doing one because of the opportunity of the other. In other words, don't succumb to the temptation of making a mediocre investment because it comes with the added bonus of a passport.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, Clem Sant and I wrote that book, and Property Going Global. Again, if people want a copy, I can send it to them. They've just got to type in PGP. But I actually dedicated an entire chapter, chapter 10, and we analyzed 16 different countries and the pros and cons, and we've got the whole global property system, and it's all based on Clem Santa's scenario planning. But I think without saying anything more, at the end of the day, Dolf is not from America. He lives in America based on his business and his property, and I got a British passport from my property investments in England. So we've been there, done that. It's not there's no kind of hidden kind of secret formula, but there are ways of doing it and getting good assets in good countries. Dolf, we've only got we've got limited time left, and I've got three questions left, so I'm gonna bang through them fairly quickly. But I know you've been fascinated by globalization, and I know when I was there 2 years ago, I actually went to an event where you were teaching Americans actually how for them to think out beyond the border. As you say, only 15% of them got a passport and don't even understand why they would want to leave America. And you've been taking them to Lake Como and places around the world, and actually trying to teach them about globalization. But kind of we've spoken quite a lot about this tonight, so I don't think we need to go into too much detail. But kind of where do you see this going? Between Bitcoin and borders being dropped, and where are our kids 20, 30 years from now?
I see this trend as accelerating, and without trying to sound self-laudatory, people who listen to this message now and act on it, even if it's only to encourage their kids to be a bit more global in their outlook, I think they're going to reap the benefits tenfold. Whereas those who say, nope, it's never going to happen, our countries are going to fight more, we've got terrorism, we're going to close our borders down, button down, and we'll hunker down and make do here, I think they're the ones who are going to miss out. It is a global trend, and even though we all complain about some of the aspects of globalization, fewer jobs or what other nonsense we come up with, we all reap the benefit of cheaper products. And the fact that we all tend to buy our high-end gadgets from Japan, Nikon and Canon cameras, I'm not promoting those brands, but they are two of the biggest names in the world now for cameras. And a lot of the lesser brands are Japanese too, Panasonic, Konica, Praktica, you name it. The fact that they all come from Japan is because they do it more efficiently. Japanese cars for a long time had more gadgets and electronic this and remote that than any other car, and that's why they did so well. We all buy things from China because whether we like it or not, whether we complain about their low wage rates, we all reap the benefits of buying goods that are cheap because they were manufactured with cheap labor. So I think countries should specialize what they're really, really good at. And people should do that too. I mean, it's the same as we talked about a bit earlier, Scott, about people. Do what you're really good at. If valuing a property is not your forte, get a professional valuer. And if you don't want to learn all about accounting, get a professional accountant. Don't do it all yourself. That's going to happen on a global basis. Some countries are great at growing lots and lots of food, and others are great at high tech. And whether we like it or not, America is really great at coming up with innovative ideas. That's why Facebook and Twitter and Google and all those things, whether we like to admit it or not, they all are spawned in America. You might say, well, a lot of them are created by foreign students. Well, that's true, maybe. But we attract foreign students here. It's not as if all the bright students of the world want to go to, I don't want to mention a country because it will sound as though I'm picking on them, but they don't go to Antarctica. There are simply no universities there. So I think this trend is going to continue, and those who are wide awake enough to it are going to cash in big time. The world is getting more global. Learn another language or two if you can. It'll never be a disservice to you. I do a lot of work in Japan. I have for decades now. And I speak the language reasonably well. I mean, at one stage I was pretty fluent and I got the highest grade in the national exams, blah, blah, blah. But I don't go there that much, so I get a bit rusty. Even when I go, Scott, if I just say a few sentences in Japanese, oh, it's so good to see you again. How's your wife doing? Are your kids still in school? Oh, my gosh, they're not. They've grown. What are they doing now? And even if then you revert to English because that's their preference for business, the esteem in which you will be held because you went to the not inconsiderable effort to learn a few sentences of their language will serve you so well. And not only that, I think life is more fun. And we can say, what if we put a perimeter around your house that extended 4 blocks in each direction? And we said, from now on, you cannot go over that perimeter line. People would say, are you crazy? How will I get to town? How will I get to work? How will my kids get to school? And if you see the absurdity of that, for me, the absurdity is being hemmed in on a national basis. There are so many opportunities. And, here's the thing, Scott. Few people are doing it now. We've got, I think, about a decade to take the lead in going global in anything, be it real estate or business or whatever, especially here in places like America where it's just not common to go global. Those companies that do go global early on will reap huge benefits. And the same applies in South Africa and other countries, even though the proportion of passport holders might be higher. I don't even know that stat for South Africa. But there is an opportunity that we can cash in on by being first to market.
What about
in this case, the market is the global market.
Yeah, I mean, what about for me, I've always been fascinated by technology, and from your perspective, the thing I love most about property is that it's actually quite an archaic industry. If you try to be in banking and you say that you know a lot about technology, well, they've got the greatest and the brightest minds in technology trying to help the banking system. But to meet someone who understands technology and property is almost mutually exclusive. How do you see technology influencing property over the next decade? I mean, you used to have as an example, your 110-3-1 buying deal. And as you rightly said already tonight, you can't say you looked at 100 properties if you went on the internet, looked at 100 properties, because everyone else has the ability to look at 100 properties. So, things just the ability and access to information from technology is changing. But how do you see it, evolving?
Well, that is changing, and as I alluded to, that's making it easier for us to look at things in other parts of the world. It also makes it easier for other people. But you cannot deny that if you've never actually gone out and walked the properties and seen the moss growing in the gutters and then figured out why do we even have gutters, for instance, in Phoenix, gutters don't exist. We don't have them. It rains so seldom that the problems you get from having gutters far outweighs the problems you get by not having them when it rains. So you can't beat having walked over 1,000 properties, because then you also get to see what you might be able to do to a property to not just increase its value by 10%, but to double its value. So the trend is more technology, more globalization. We once went to get on a plane to go to Florida to look at a warehouse. And I said, well, let's look on Google Maps and Google Street Views. And we did. And we could eliminate this as a candidate for acquisition just based on what we saw online. It involved half an hour of looking at a screen instead of 2 days, one day to get there, rental car, hotel, look at the place, and then unwind and come back. But that's also getting easier for other people. But if you focus on this game, Scott, and if you actually know how to walk a property and say, well, there are only 2 bedrooms here, but we can do this, this, and this, and make it 5 bedrooms and double the revenue, then you're not going to have that in your fingertips. So I still think that those of us who are willing to put in the effort can reap huge relative benefits compared with those who just want to sit behind a screen and get distracted by updating their Twitter feed and their Facebook. And I'll give you another example. We have a TV here through a cable system. We stopped broadcast TV. Well, we've still got it, but very few people use it. We cut the cable at this house ages ago because watching TV is just not that productive. You can kill a lot of time getting nowhere. If instead of that, every time you would have watched a soap for an hour, you go out and look at a property, as the years roll by, you will get so much more benefit from that, because eventually you'll find one and you say, well, this is so good, why don't I buy it? And if you do, life will never be the same. You'll have that passive income stream forever.
Dolf, in terms of time, I can see that it's 8:10, and I know that people have probably promised family and kids and stuff that they need to do stuff. So, I want to kind of go on to the very last question, and I'm going to share with people how they can, once I've asked this question, how they can join us and get to know us and spend some time with us and partner and the bigger picture and everything that we've been discussing tonight. Obviously, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but from my perspective, we're launching something that's pretty exciting. We've spoken about how it's going to revolutionize property forever, provide wealth and opportunity to everyone. I've obviously known you for quite a long time now. We've been talking about it for quite a long time, but finally the technology and the legislation has finally come to the point where it's now possible. And you're obviously coming out to SA, etc. But I mean, why are you excited? I mean, what is that's going to change things? And while Dolph's answering this question, I'm also going to ask you guys some questions in terms of on the polls, in terms of what you want to invest. If you saw something that you'd like, what type of capital you want to invest, what type of time frames you want to invest, etc. Because obviously for us, I always joke with people, Dolf, but just because your dollars are green doesn't mean we want to be business partners. At the end of the day, it's having like-minded individuals, etc., etc. And for us, it's very much a vetting process. We only want to work with people who are like-minded, have common interests, make sure that our interests are aligned, that they want trust and transparency, that it's based on nature's laws, that we're not trying to win at all costs, and it's very much in that team environment. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions while Dolf answers that, and then I'm going to share with people how they can actually take advantage of it.
All right, well, Scott, the reason I'm excited by this is, firstly, it is new. There have been conventional ways of doing things, either on your own or under the auspices of groups investing as a company. But, the real analogy is how the internet has changed so many things. I mean, social networking has changed the way we think and not only do business, but how we conduct revolutions. And most pundits claim that what happened in Tunisia and Libya could not have happened without the ability of Facebook to communicate to the masses instantly where they were meeting and where the protests were. In generations gone by, there'd have to be an ad placed in the paper, and usually an authoritarian government would have banned the publication of that ad before it went to print, so no one would have known. But now governments can't really stop that. The information and the ability to disseminate information is out there. So it's revolutionized it, and the same is going for funding. You know, we've seen on TV, or some of you may have seen, that there are programs like Kickstarter, where someone can come up with an idea for a gadget or something and say, well, here's my idea. I need, you name the figure, $300,000, R1,000,000, whatever, to bring this idea to fruition. Here's what I'm willing to offer. I'm taking lumps of $100 or $50 or whatever it is, and if I raise enough capital to make this thing, everyone who put up the money will get one of the first units sent to them. Well, they're finding that people are oversubscribing these Kickstarter programs, sometimes by a ratio of 10 or 20 to 1. So, you know, they're looking at raising $500,000 and they raise 10 million. And instead of stopping the raise at $500,000, they then say, well, in this case, we're going to add these features and do that. Everyone's still going to get what they signed up for by putting in their $50. They get one of the units. But now the unit is better. They make it faster, smarter, smaller, more efficient, less battery consumption, you name it. So this is a trend that has emerged. And if all you've done is heard of Kickstarter and Shark Tank and programs like that, well, that's better than not having heard about them. But investigate them, see what they're about. I'm not saying you necessarily have to invest in something in them, but it's a trend. The world is changing. Scott, you put it so right at the beginning by saying that, you know, the last century was one model, and now we've got a new model. And it's only when you gain a few years under your belt that you start to look at history in terms of your own lifespan. You know, when you're a young kid, you're 14, 15, 18 or whatever, and you're studying something, well, that happened 20 years ago. That was ages ago. That was before I was born. And that happened 50 years ago and 200 years ago, Huygens and microscopes and Galileo and all that sort of stuff. You look at it in one way, but when you've got a few years under your belt, you start to think, well, that happened in my lifetime. And, you know, I'm unfortunately old enough to remember a world before cell phones existed. And I remember when they came out, and the only brand available was a Motorola flip phone. It was $5,995, $6,000 for a phone, and $1.89 a minute to call. And we all thought, well, only rich people will ever afford those. Even when we saw the technology on ads, it didn't occur to us that within a generation, every little kid at school would have a phone, and parents would endorse the use of that phone because we could monitor them and see where they were and arrange where to meet and all that. So the world is changing. And what we're doing with this series of events is sharing exactly how it has changed in the property world and what we've done to harness that change and make it available to people. It's a great way of sharing. Sorry.
No, sorry, yeah.
Well, it's a great way of sharing how this new trend, this new technology will revolutionize how real estate is being done. And once again, and I guess I should close with this, you know, we have a choice of being part of making it happen, or we can watch it happen, or in 10 years' time, we can say, you know what, I vaguely recall a video conference or a webinar, I forget what it was called back then, with Scott somebody and Rolf or Dolf somebody, and they were talking about that, but I never took action. Or you can come along and hear what it's all about and decide if you want to, you know, if you want to be part of this new wave. It's the people who are at the front leading edge who always do well. It's like surfing. You want to be 1 foot in front of the wave or 6 inches behind it. There's not much difference. There's only 18 inches difference or 15 centimeters or whatever it is. It's more than that. 40 centimeters difference. But it makes a world of difference as to how fast you get to the shore. Do you want to go fast or do you want to go far?
You know, and I think
really
Dolf, to back up what you're saying, I love what Henny came back with from MIPIM, which is the biggest property event in the world with 80,000 of the most successful property people. And after learning for 4 or 5 days, he pretty much came back to me and said, it's that simple. You either make dust or you eat dust, which is far more dry humor, South African humor, but very much in line. And so ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested in the Global Property Summit, just type in GPS. And we'll have one of our team phone you tomorrow, and we will actually share with you the dates in Durban. You've got them the 13th of May, Cape Town the 15th of May, Midrand the 20th of May, and Bloemfontein the 22nd of May. And then we've got the Billionaire Breakaway. If you are an existing client or of either IPS or Wealth Migrate, please make sure that you get hold of the team because you are invited to the Billionaire Breakaway. Family is always invited first and at a significant discount as well because, it's really the whole purpose of the Billionaire Breakaway is for like-minded people to spend time together, etc., etc. And if you do put in GPS, Even though there's a discount on the website, we will actually be giving a further discount because we really appreciate people taking the time out of their night and coming and joining and learning and having great energy and everything else. So if people are interested in GPS, just type it in. There are, very simply, if you look at the website, there are 3 different ways to attend. There's a standard ticket where you get to come along and learn from us, and you get a copy of my book. There's a VIP ticket, which allows for 2 people to actually come along, have lunch, to spend some time with Dolf and some of our other guests. And also, there's a whole lot of products that are included in that in terms of value, education, etc., etc. And then the last one is the platinum ticket, and that's where it actually includes coming away for the Billionaire Breakaway, which is 2 nights, 2 days and 2 nights on a game farm. It's all experiential. And I certainly know, and I know there's a gentleman online tonight, and I'm just going to call him Alan for simplicity's sake. But I mean, Alan and I have been going back and forth for over a year now. He came to a breakfast over a year, but when he came away on the breakaway and spent the weekend with us and had fun and had a few drinks and really got to know each other. And I mean, this is an extremely sophisticated guy by South African and international standards. I'm sure, Dolf, you would back me up based on the questions he was asking in Atlanta. But those are the type of people you're getting to interact with, and that's actually what juices me. You know, Dolf gets juiced by doing deals. I get juiced by getting the right people on that bus, to use your Jim Collins analogy, and actually collectively together we can do so much better in terms of the quality of the questions we ask and the deals and everything. And that for me is the value of the breakaway. You know, the events are fantastic, but the breakaway is where you get to really spend that quality time, interact with like-minded, sophisticated people, and most importantly, get to know each other, become friends. You've got that trust and transparency, which then, you know, allows you to go forward in terms of doing deals together. Just in terms of people that want to come to the events, we've got one of the best people internationally that I've met. I've done over 2,100 international investments on 4 different continents. And this gentleman and this company is one of the best I've ever dealt with. He's going to be out in South Africa. We do have a webinar tomorrow night if you're interested for a little bit more details. But I mean, there's going to be single family residential homes, 8% net yields as a minimum, financing at 6%. Your loan to value is 80%, fixed for 15 years. I mean, this sort of stuff in South Africa you've never heard of before. You're still buying at 40% below replacement costs. You've got 3-year leases, which is very unusual for residential. And the interesting thing for us from a South African perspective, you can see a picture down in the bottom right-hand corner, but they really are nice houses, good areas. And interesting enough for us, more than 80% of our clients that invest end up repurchasing because things work and they get their returns. And I mean, last year, I don't like promising things because I can't necessarily say it's going to, you know, do the same sort of thing. But, you know, people last year, literally, if you take the Rand devaluation into account, we're making returns of over 40% on their investments in terms of where they're looking at. And then for those of you who want to be more sophisticated, you want to look at commercial, there's going to be different deals. But just one of them as an example is this medical opportunity we've been talking about. It's 7 buildings. It's got an 8.1% cap. The current market is between a 7 and a 7.5, and I'm not going to go into details, but that's actually a discount of in the region of 8 to 10%. We've currently got financing in place at 4.5%, 65% loan to value, and a 5-year fix. There's an 18% IRR. It's 92% occupied. The blended lease is over across the 7 buildings is 5.5 years, and 38% of them are blue chip government tenants on 10-year leases. So literally government tenants. It's pretty much as strong as you can get in terms of where it is. And I know Dolf and I and a number of other investors literally spend time going around and looking at these opportunities. We're in a 45-day due diligence period, so we have secured the opportunity, but we're currently going through due diligence. But these are the type of opportunities, whether it's residential or commercial, and between Dolf and the rest of the team, it won't just be American either. Like with time, there'll be opportunities from all over the place, but always sticking to our fundamental principle of partnership and making sure that our interests are aligned, that we're dealing with the best of breed partners, that they also co-investing with us, because that is the most important safe principle that I've learned from Henny's perspective, because our number one objective must not be forgotten, and that is wealth preservation. If you want to make great money, there's great opportunities in South Africa. We're even going to go and look at some of the opportunities in South Africa. Henny's just closed a deal, over R1 billion worth of opportunities. He's currently building 9 hospitals, an example, but we've got a commercial and an office park, and also residential opportunities, believe it or not, in a place called Bloemfontein. And, for those of you that are close to the circle, you'll get invited to actually come up. I'm really excited to take Dolf up there and to show him the opportunities and what we're doing. And Henny's already closed those deals and are actually in the pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. So it just gives you an idea of the type of things But I mean, you've got to be there. You've got to, as Dolf said, there's those three types of people. Some people are getting involved. Some people are watching what's going on, and others are wondering what's happening. And you've got to be there to know what's going on. So just to finish off with the slide, just to explain again, the 20th century was about selling things. The 21st century is all about partnerships. That's all we're interested in. We're not selling anything. All that we're interested in is partnerships. All that we do is property, and specifically international property. I've done it on 4 continents. I think, Dolf, you're up to five continents now. So, I mean, just between the two of us, we've got extensive experience in the different areas of the world. I think track record is probably the most important thing, particularly in property. It's one thing to say you're good at IT and you've been doing it for the last year, but in property, you had to be in this game a long time. And as you said, Dolf, and I really took heart to what you said right in the beginning, I believe in property specifically, it's not what happens when it's working, it's what you actually do when it's not working that defines whether you are reliable and someone to partner with. That's my opinion. And 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 then just I've spoken about the asset managers, the experience they've got, and most importantly, partnering with the West. And as I said to you, we've got an combined experience of 128 years in international property between Dolf and Henny and Ian Scott and myself, and Yaku and Brendan and our asset managers Ryan, etc., etc. So if you're keen to come along, just type in GPS. I want to finish off with a little metaphor. Life coaches and business coaches always say, "How do you eat an elephant?" And don't get me wrong. What we're talking about is massive, and it's a really big opportunity, but also a big challenge. And I joked with our business coach in January. I said, "It's not about how do you eat an elephant; it's how do you eat a herd of elephants." And for me, it's the metaphor, and it's the metaphor of Steve Jobs. In 1977, they had the Apple computer. It was that size. All the components were very big. And in his book, if you've read it, he said one day we'll have a digital book. And in 2010, he launched the iPad. It took him 33 years of jumping through hurdles, jumping through making sure the technology could adapt. But he stuck to one dream, one vision, and making sure that it happened. And for us, I think the really, really exciting thing is that something I wrote in a dissertation in 1998, is that we want to take an old industry steeped in tradition and run by many smaller, disparate, and often inefficient operators, and to redefine it through the use of web technology to increase global reach, partnerships, and efficiencies of scale, so as to provide a one-stop, enhanced, and personalized service to our clients. Now, I know in 2014 that makes a lot of sense, but in 1998 that wasn't really heard of. And really, when you take what Dolf said, the opportunity in real estate, the opportunity with IT, the opportunity to blend IT and property and really align oneself with nature's laws, it allows one to go back to our vision from 2004, which was to revolutionize and set the industry benchmark by 2015. And for those of you who come along to the Global Property Summit, we're going to share with you something that is going to be launched for the very first time in South Africa. It's global. It's going to be the first one of its kind globally. It's going to be the Amazon of global real estate, and it will literally revolutionize property forever. And, as Dolf said, if nothing else, you get the opportunity to come along and see what we are actually talking about. So we're launching it at the Global Property Summit. There'll be opportunities for people to invest in some of the best properties, both locally and internationally, from as little as 20,000 Rand. And most importantly, you'll have the opportunity to partner with some of the most experienced property professionals in the industry. There's never been anything done like this before. Most people try and sell their knowledge. We're not interested in making upfront returns. We're only interested in partnering with like-minded individuals, and there are no fees in the middle. There are no fees in the beginning. This is not a syndication. It's not a fund. We are co-investing with you, and we benefit as partners on the upside, and we treat it in exactly the same way. It's nature's laws. It's birds flying in a flock. If you fly on your own as one bird versus a bird flying in a flock of 25, you can fly 70% further if you're flying in a bird. Our interests have to be aligned. The returns can only be earned on the back end. People can't make fees on the front end, be it coaching, be it books, be it selling you property, be it syndication or funds. They need to have their interests aligned to make sure that it's safe. For us, it's about trust. We only want to do business if there's trust and if there's transparency, so that people can see exactly what's happening right through. So for us, if you're interested, all the information is on the Global Property Summit. If you go to the website, you'll see it's all there. I would suggest you don't buy a ticket. I would suggest you type in GPS for anyone that's online, because for those of you online, you will get extra incentives and discounts rather than actually buying online. And the reason we're doing that is that we want to applaud you and thank you for being here tonight. And before I say thank you to Dolf, I think really, hopefully tonight it's come through very, very clearly. You can learn from the rest or you can partner with the best. And that is the new model. 20th century has gone now. The 21st century is all about partnership. It's about taking track records. It's about finding the best partners. It's about building the best teams, which is the very first thing Dolf taught us this evening. And then getting involved and learning and growing together. And, Dolf, I want to thank you tonight so much for being online. It really is always an honor and a privilege, and I always learn so much. And I took, so many notes tonight in terms of what you said. And from my perspective, it's such an honor to be doing this with you, to learning with you, to be partnering with you, and to doing international real estate together. It's a long haul from the boy who was 19 and read a book all those years ago.
Oh, that's music to me. Yes, thank you so much too, Scott. Thank you for the opportunity, and the feelings are very mutual. So I appreciate it very much.
Guys, just for everyone who was online tonight, it's really, really been great. Thank you very much for everyone being online. I apologize that we ran a little bit over. Dolph's got so much to share. I think this webinar could have gone on for another 10 hours. But do come along to the Property Summit. We'll have time for those people that are interested. We'll have time to sit down one-to-one. And if you want to come away on the Billionaire Breakaway, it'll be the best opportunity to really deal and meet with like-minded, sophisticated people and most importantly, ask the real questions that you want to know in terms of the bigger picture. So thank you to everyone tonight. It's been fantastic. Don't forget about the webinar tomorrow night if you are interested. And otherwise, we'll see you next week as we travel around the country. Thank you, Dolf. It's only the middle of the day there now, or 6 o'clock, or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. That's the advantage of being in America, is you still got a whole day ahead of you, and it's not a public holiday.
Right. Yeah, no, it's 11:30 a.m. It's good. But no, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.